The Hub is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to The Hub. I'm Nestor Licanto, and our guests this week are Ginger Cruz, who is the president of Management International and a policy advocate, and Mr. Simon Sanchez. Of course, you recognize him as a businessman and a commissioner with the CCU, Consolidated Commission on Utilities. I've only been covering it for 20 years, Si. All right.
And now the CUC and Saipan, so you got to get all the acronyms right.
All right, but they're here to talk about a little bit about a major project that they're being proposed to put our power system underground. And I'm going to start with you, Ginger. Just give us an opening, kind of overview of what this project entails.
Sure. Well, we all lived through Typhoon Mawar, and as that occurred and the extent of the damage to the island and to the military bases specifically became apparent, it became quickly apparent to a lot of folks that in the year 2023, putting the power lines underground made so much sense, not only for the economy of Guam and the people of Guam, but as important for the national security. You have every single space, land, air, submarine base located on Guam at the tip of the spear at the most important time for the Indo-Pacific region. And so that's what kind of triggered it and got Simon and I started talking about the need to put Guam's power underground, not only for Guam, but as a matter of national security.
But $7 billion, that's the estimated cost right now, Simon. Who's going to pay for that?
Well, as we point out in the white paper that we presented, we have been hardening the distribution system at GPA for the last 20 years after Pang San Hua, but we've been using concrete poles because you can do that for a couple $100 million. To underground all of Guam is now estimated, and John Benavente has done a pretty good analysis, about $6.4 billion just for the undergrounding. And then we want to bring in a large battery as well that kind of fits into this energy resiliency concept that Ginger and I are promoting. But the combination of which approaches $7 billion. And by putting the distribution system underground, because notwithstanding the load shedding challenges that we're facing right now, generation survives typhoons, right? But it's and even with concrete poles, of which in the last 20 years we've hardened 15,900 out of 16,000. We're down to the last 100 because that was affordable. That's what ratepayers could afford. But as we point out, the cost to underground, $6-7 billion, would price the power beyond the reach of our people, and that we can't do, right? And yet, as Ginger pointed out, the entire island was exposed. The military was exposed. We were surprised to see how many wooden poles are still at Big Navy and on the Air Force Base. But after Pang San Hua, Anderson Air Force Base hardened from the dead combustion turbine to the front gate. Because as you know, they run their own distribution system through a private contractor. And they had power throughout Marwar to the front gate. Once it entered the gate, though, they had some challenges in their internal distribution system. Big Navy isn't hardened at all. And that's the bigger installation, that's the bigger presence here. And they have hundreds of wooden poles that they had to deal with that they're taking down. And I'm sure they're on their way to hardening within their base. And I'm going to guess probably undergrounding, because that makes a lot more sense, because concrete poles stand up, but the wires come off the poles, right? And we, even though our recovery was much faster than it was under Pang San Hua, but we cut it in half. In a modern society like today, and with telecom, every one of us has a phone and an iPad or a computer. Telecom is now in the Mount Rushmore of who do you need to restore besides the hospital, sure, the water. You need energy. You got to keep telecom going, and the underpinning support of all these needs, pre and post typhoon, is energy and the distribution system.
Ginger, this is a pretty ambitious timeline that you guys laid out, 5 years. Why so?
So we're taking advantage of the fact that Guam is really the tip of the spear for Indo-PACOM, and there has been a lot of discussion. There have been actual written commitments made by the military to address the issue of installation resiliency and climate resiliency. And so the military has actually been wargaming climate issues. So they're saying, we've got a base, we're ready to take on any challenge. We want to deter any threats from China if anything happens in the region. Loose discussion says maybe 2027 would be the earliest at which we would see some potential for engagement in the area. And so in that whole urgency to get the military bases hardened, if we can get the power situation in Guam addressed as an issue of installation resiliency and get the whole island, because if you think about it, the whole island really is here not only for our own economy, but also as a key critical component of national security. And so those two things kind of came together. The fact that 2027 is a goal gives that sense of urgency. And we think that the Department of Defense and the leadership of Indo-PACOM, the Joint Region Marianas, also sees the need and the benefit for seeking congressional support to find funding with the Department of Defense to help put Guam's power underground. Now, it's not the Guam taxpayer or ratepayers are not going to pay. We're paying to increase the amount of generation. I mean, we've taken out bonds, we've got public-private partnerships, over $2 billion, where, you know, the Ukadu generator is going to add that online. So on Guam, we're carrying our part of the burden, but we can't find the money to be able to put it underground because that is going to take $7 billion. So we're hoping that with the DoD's timelines, with all of the things that are going on in the Indo-Pacific region with China and Taiwan, that the timing of that can also inform the need to really get Congress to address this and to give us the money to put the power underground.
All right, we've got a lot more to unpack, but we do need to take a break, so we'll be back right after this. Stay with us.
There it is. My dad went EV.
It's electric. Don't be shocked.
The guy who's eternally locked out of his email is going EV. Ooh, nice car.
Actually, it's an EV. Rhymes with Kev.
Look, EVIP parking.
I get it. You think they don't charge fast enough or go far enough.
Up to 80% charge in 18 minutes. Range? Heck, we could go to Mexico.
Are you Kevin Bacon?
But EVs aren't going to stop being a thing. Look at the Ioniq 6.
Maca mushroom frap for Kevin.
So just make the leap already.
Okay, watch this. Blue or red? Blue light, red light. I can also make it play nature sounds if you want.
Let's just drive.
Introducing the all-electric Hyundai Ioniq 6 with up to 360-mile range. When it comes to EVs, we're thinking of every mile.
New chicken nuggets from KFC?
Everybody's gonna want these. Let's eat these inside.
Try new Kentucky Fried Chicken Nuggets. You've never had nuggets like these.
And we're back with Ginger Cruz and Simon Sanchez talking about this $7 billion at the moment potential underground power system. Simon, let me ask about Congress and the Department of Defense's appetite, do you think, for paying for this?
Well, as Ginger points out, they are very aware that dealing with climate, you know, and we're not taking a position on what causes climate change, but the reality is if you're out here in this part of the world, there's going to be typhoons. And as we point out in the report, Ginger's pulled out a number of their own studies and other federal studies that says this is what's happening. So how do we prepare for that? And Department of Defense has the biggest purse, has the greatest interest in protecting America and protecting Guam and the region. And so that's who we have focused our attention on, because it's in their interest to protect us and it's in their interest to protect America. Today, Ginger and I were both at the Codell this Thursday, this morning, and China was mentioned in every other sentence by every representative. The concern about China, their presence, the kinds of shenanigans that they pull in the region. You know, Palau talked about intrusions that were inappropriate. Governor Palacios talked about intrusions that were inappropriate. So we know China is a concern for the region. It's a concern for the country. So how do we deal with it? And then Marwar comes in, and better than a tabletop, it was the real thing. And it really exposed the weaknesses in the distribution system. The military is a customer of the Guam Power Authority and has been for 20, 30 years and just signed up for another 10 years. And of course, we're a customer of the Guam Power Authority. So it's a mutually beneficial interest. It's a win-win. It's similar, if you recall, Nestor, we got Department of Defense to build the brand new Northern Wastewater Treatment Plant at no cost to ratepayers. that was an example of finding solutions that benefit Guam and benefit the military, and convincing them that it was in the military's interest to produce a win-win solution for the community. Because on the one hand, we're the tip of the spear. On the other hand, we're also the first line of defense. And you've got to protect that line of defense. And energy resiliency is fundamental, right? You can't bring in, Ginger has great examples about the military loves all these toys, but the toys don't have energy, then they're not useful. And so energy resiliency is critical to our people. It's critical to the Department of Defense. It's critical to our country. And so we're building support. If you recall, the community came out, particularly at the Chamber of Commerce years ago, and I was still on the commission back then, back in 2008, about the buildup. And remember, it was a Marine base by 2020 and $30 billion. And even the community said, hey, we like the concept. It's a little rushed, but we understand, right? And so, and that's where the 5 years comes from, because, when you talk to John B., and we've built some infrastructure. Even if you handed us $5 billion tomorrow, we couldn't build it that fast, right? And we don't need all the money at once. John Beneventi suggests maybe $2.5 billion would get us off to a good start. And then going to the Congress, we're saying, look, you can break up this $7 billion over the next 5 years. It's not going to break the DoD budget. I mean, we are a mosquito in terms of expense when it comes to DoD spending. And yet the reward, the bang for the buck, no pun intended, right, of putting the entire distribution system underground and then adding Ukuru by 2026 and the renewables that we're adding, that mix is going to provide more reliable power at a lower cost, as long as we can distribute that energy to all the customers, the people of Guam, and the U.S. military. And we're getting some very positive responses from our leadership. We briefed Governor Liu. We're about to brief Governor Palacios, but he's aware of it. We get a chance to brief the Admiral next week. We've reached out to the legislature. Senator Lujan is looking at a resolution of support. Obviously, the CCU is going to come out of support. The CUC is going to come out in support. The region is going to come out to support this idea that when you protect Guam and the CNMI, you protect America. And as Ginger's wisely pointed out in some of our discussions, how much money has already been invested by the United States in the defense of our interests in this region? They built the base. They're expanding, spending money on Anderson. They're going to spend big money on big Navy, even beyond just putting their distribution system back together. So our country's made a huge investment in this region, and they need to protect that investment. And one of the best ways to protect it is to harden the distribution system for power so that everybody benefits and can deal with natural disasters and, God forbid, man-made disasters.
Ginger, Simon mentioned bang for the buck, but you've also outlined in here some other economic value to this system.
Absolutely. So when you're talking about recovery from typhoons, Guam always has this lag time. I mean, we have to have Antonov aircraft bring in extra bucket trucks, and there's all of this money that's expended to string the lines back up on those concrete power poles. All of that money would be saved. If you think about it, if the power gets put underground, not only do you not lose power during the storm, I mean, there were some places on Guam that were underground that didn't lose power throughout the storm. If the whole island was in that situation, business could come back much faster. A lot of times they're offline because the power is out, and that sort of delays everything else. If they're able to come online faster, that reduces how much disaster unemployment that the federal government has to spend. That reduces, there's a lot of positive benefits from being able to keep the power going. The other thing to think about too is they're installing a 360-degree missile defense system to defend Guam against the unlikely event that a missile hits us. But we know that it's extremely likely that a typhoon is going to hit us, and yet we don't have anything to protect us against that. So if you just sort of look at this, it's not only common sense. In the long term, it's more affordable, because in the long term, it's going to provide a security and a resiliency that's going to not only help national security, it's going to help the economic development of Guam. One other key thing, all of the undersea cables that terminate in Guam. There's been discussion for decades about using Guam as a data center. And now that artificial intelligence uses a ton of data, the demand for more data centers where these underwater cables come out is increasing. But one of the great barriers to putting a data center on Guam is the fact you can't guarantee that the power is going to stay on. And you cannot have a data center that, okay, it's great except for the 3 weeks after the typhoon when we have to string everything back. So there's a lot of economic development, and those are just a few, but there's a lot of economic development benefits to this. And if Guam is stronger, then the United States is stronger, because we are that beacon for the United States in the middle of the Pacific. So our economic health as a tourism spot, as an economic development engine, and as a defense site is all enhanced by what we consider to be a relatively reasonable investment.
All right, we got to take another break, but when we come back, we'll talk about public and stakeholder engagement and leadership engagement and all that stuff that you need to get out there so that you can convince people that this is a great idea. We'll be back with more of The Hub right after this.
Pre-Typhoon Mawar debris cleanup is underway by FEMA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Stage and sort eligible typhoon debris, including green waste, large appliances, residential construction, demolition debris, and metals as soon as possible at the residential right-of-way to take advantage of this free service. Ineligible debris will be left on site. And updated information by visit tinyurl.com/cleanupgu. This ad is paid for by the Office of the Governor of Guam.
I do it big. With the Pizza Hut Big Dinner Box, however you want a dinner, we got you covered. Big time. I do it big. The Big Dinner Box. 2 pizzas, breadsticks, and wings or pasta.
Oh, hello.
And we're back with Ginger Cruz and Simon Sanchez, and of course we're talking about this underground power system that is being planned for possibly in the near future, I would say, in a five-year plan. Talk about your efforts at public engagement. I know you mentioned earlier that you've talked with the governor and the governor of Saipan and with some congressional leaders. Tell us both of you about some other engagement that needs to be done to get this really rolling.
Well, I think one of the things that makes something like this really move is when everybody's on the same page. There's a lot of things that are going on post-Mawar. The military right now is in the midst of getting the funding to repair the bases. The government of Guam is sort of looking at the long-term plans for what they want to do. The Guam Power Authority is looking at long-term plans as well, talking to FEMA. But if everyone can coalesce around a concept that would then inform future planning, then the likelihood of it happening really increases. And so we've been talking to everyone. We've been talking to the Mayor's Council. They're ready to support. Really, the thing that we're waiting for right now is just the final piece, which is the Guam Power Authority, who's done a wonderful job preparing the numbers. And we're not, I don't mean to sound awful about this, but we're not Puerto Rico. You know, the Guam Power Authority has actually proven that when you give them the funds, that they're able to execute. Ukudu Power Plant is a good example. It got delayed a little bit because of the typhoon, but everyone can see, I mean, that is on track. That's going to add generation. So what we need to do is we need to get the community at large engaged. We need the business community. We've been talking to the Chamber of Commerce because they're a critical part of this. Because each member of the Chamber of Commerce engages with other members of the business community. And so you'll have a shipping company or a fuel company or a major retailer who can work with their corporate headquarters and have them use their lobbyists in DC to say, hey, this is good for everybody. If Guam has reliable, long-term power survivability in an era where we know there's going to be typhoons, and this El Nino is potentially going to last for the next 3 years. And those are 3 really critical years when we've got to be able to assure everyone that we have that survivability of power. So it's a matter of getting literally everybody on board, every community group, every business group, all the political support. And then on the Hill, we met with Congressman Moylan, and he was talking about members on both sides of the aisle, finding out who are Guam's friends on the Hill, how can we work through these issues and let everybody understand it's not only in Guam's interest, it's also in the U.S. national interest. And if we can make that case effectively, then I think we do have a good shot at it.
Yeah. Simon, what are some of the challenges? I know in your experience with the CCU and for example, Ukudu, and letting the public know that this is good for them. But there are challenges like land rights and that sort of thing. Talk about that.
Well, I mean, actually, one of the things we think about is we want to make sure we don't dodea the power system where the military builds their own. But we've had these discussions before. That's why they didn't build a brand new wastewater treatment plant. They paid for upgrading ours. And Ukadu is a short 24 months away, 36 months away. It's between the new solar farm and Ukadu. Ukadu is a $600 million plant. There's $1 billion of new generation that's being put in, public-private partnership, already on track, already permitted, right? And that's the closest solution set to eliminating any concerns about capacity. We had the unfortunate accident in 2016 with Cavers 3 and 4. We were going to retire them. We've had some delays on Ukadu, but it's happening. And Ukadu is going to be the fastest solution to generation, but we need to do the distribution side, because it doesn't matter if you generate the energy if you can't distribute it. And Marwar really exposed the weakness. And to me, it's just such common sense now, as Ginger alluded to. It makes sense for Guam, it makes sense for our country, and it recognizes that the people of Guam have done their share, but they can't come up with $6 billion if we want to keep power affordable. And if we had to put in the $6 billion ourselves, even the military they pay 20% of it anyway, right? So it's this collective effort that Ginger and I realized was the key to being successful. And we're reaching out to the community, the elected representatives, we're reaching out to the military. We've even expanded discussions to include the CNMI, because they're part of the same argument that we're defending our country out here. You need to invest in the ability to defend our country, and energy is probably the most important. Without energy, you have nothing. And so the focus on the distribution side is where we are, because we see the generation side being solved by Ukadu, notwithstanding the delays. That $1 billion of investment is already in the ground or being put into the ground. We need help on the distribution side, and that's where we're focused.
And burying these cables underground would be using the existing right-of-ways. We wouldn't be needing to condemn any other property.
We don't think so. I mean, we already have poles on easements, so it's just putting that
underground instead of in the air.
Yep. And then there's one other benefit, potentially the $153 million for the broadband. As we're looking at trenching for broadband, as the Guam Waterworks Authority is looking at upgrading water lines, this is a matter of urban planning. If we can get the funding for this and we can sort of look ahead, one of the reasons we want to talk about it now is that you can save money by taking that trenching, doing it once, and potentially in certain areas, and being able to solve 3 problems in one swoop.
And as Ginger alluded to, we're not just looking at DOD. We'll look at FEMA. Governor Liu directed us to FEMA. We had some great meetings, and FEMA has gone from just paying for old mistakes to actually future mitigation for exactly what Ginger said. They're tired of coming in after the fact. If they invest their money before a disaster hits a community, in future needs for FEMA decline. But FEMA faces challenges in the budget. FEMA has to deal with Lahaina now, has to deal with flooding in California, and has to deal with typhoons on Guam. So we're going to pursue funding from all sources. But we think the Department of Defense knows that they've got to help us help them. And the best way they can help us is to fund the undergrounding of the distribution system on Guam.
Yeah. Explain a little bit more about how this goes through the congressional process. How would this be presented to Congress, and how does it get through that, what is, the congressional red tape?
So we're pretty excited about the progress we've made so far. So when Mawar hit, it was right at the tail end of when the House and the Senate were discussing the National Defense Authorization Act, which is the DoD budget. And
so that would be the vehicle, the NDAA?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that would most likely be.
Correct.
That's the one that funds the military construction money, which is the largest amount of money that has been put into Guam for all of the military bases. And there is precedent for using military construction money outside of the fence when it contributes to something that is of value to the military. So we can use that as a vehicle, and Congressman Moylan did, Simon talked to him, he got language into the House side, and then I worked with certain folks that are on the lobbying side of the Senate, and they thought it was really important, and so they, along with INDOPACOM and some other folks, said, let's get some language into the Senate side. And so we're very lucky at this point that even though we only had 2 weeks to do it, that we have language in the Senate and House version. So what's happening now is those 2 versions are being reconciled. And then once those conference committees come up with the final version, at least there's a marker. Now, there's no money yet, but the thing that's important is to have the NDAA for this year actually mention that the infrastructure in Guam is a priority. So then once that study is done, then it opens the door. And then the idea is that will then lead to a study by the Department of Defense, which will start to make concrete recommendations. And once we send GPA's plans over and everybody looks at it and Indo-PACOM considers it, then there's a good chance that they will be able to discuss in the committees putting an actual dollar amount into the 2024 budget. So, you know, the timing was lucky so far. We're crossing our fingers it makes it through the conference committees, and then we'll see if the project starts to get some legs and moves into funding for next year.
How about business and corporate lobbying? I mean, you know, there's someone's going to have to supply the materials, and someone's going to have to do the work. So
we talked about that because it's not just vendors that are here, like the oil companies. I mean, we have a lot of companies here that have ties back to the mainland, but contractors, you know, to do the buildup, the best contractors on Guam had to partner with very large U.S. contractors for the bonding, right? Well, those partnerships still exist. The buildup is still going on, and the U.S. partners, they have congressmen and senators. It's in their interest to keep this going so that we can complete the circle of defending our country by defending and improving Guam. And so that's the outreach. We're going to ask to meet with Guam contractors. You know, it's really, as we like to say, we're building the choir of voices. And we want to make sure we're singing from the same song sheet, maybe different harmonies, different interests to blend. But at the end of the day, investing in Guam, putting $6-7 billion into the ground so that we have energy resiliency, takes care of the people of Guam, and it takes care of our country. And that marriage of interests is so critical, and that's why we're working so hard to push it.
Okay, Ginger, about a minute and a half left. I'm going to give you the last word. Why is this a great idea?
Because it's achievable. So Guam, many years ago, the importance in the military perspective was the reason that we have an airport, was the reason that we have a port, was the reason that a lot of our infrastructure was built. Guam itself couldn't quite do that. We don't have the economic capability on our own. So we're at another inflection point because of the importance of the Taiwan-China issue and the fact that Guam is essential to that. We need to leverage that, and we need a big idea. And it needs to be an idea that makes sense. It needs to make sense for the people of Guam, but it needs to make sense for U.S. defense as well. And so I think that the timing is really ideal, and I think this is something that will have a long-lasting, decades-long impact that will be a benefit for Guam. So we're hoping that the stars have aligned, and that this is the big idea that we can really push. And if it does come to fruition, then it's really going to change people, because in future typhoons, you'll be able to sit at home and keep your television. Well,
watch KUAM.
Watch KUAM all the way through it.
Yeah. All right, best of luck. Thank you very much. Ginger Cruz, Simon Sanchez. I'm Nestor Licanto. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again next week on The Hub.